station. Okay. All right. Well, you are here for the session Cooperative Solutions for food justice and racial equity. This is part of the FCI Live series, our winter 2023 series. This is our last day, but we have some incredible sessions. Very excited to welcome into this space Gabby Davis and Anthony Goodwin from National Cooperative Grocers. Hello to both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So we wanted to have a conversation today about the work you guys are doing for National Cooperative Grocers. And just in case, we do have people in all different levels of work, just getting started with a startup food co-op, or maybe they're about to open. Some folks don't know what National Cooperative Grocers is. Would one of you be willing real quick to tell people what that's about?
Anthony
sure,
would love to do that.
Yeah. National Cooperative Grocers, NCG, was formed by food co-ops probably about 20 or so years ago, and is essentially a co-op of co-ops. And so we are owned by food co-ops. Our members are food co-ops, similar to how many of you as food co-ops, your members are your customers. And NCG was formed really to provide, I think, some regional and national networking and sharing opportunities, best practice sharing for the co-ops that were formed in that early phase, the 60s, 70s, 80s co-ops that realized that there was strength in numbers at a national level. And so one component or goal of the formation was really around just strengthening network and sharing. And the other was to be able to compete from a supply chain and cost of goods perspective. And so one of the largest benefits of NCG membership is our national purchasing contracts, the largest being the UNFI contract. And so instead of food co-ops having to go out and purchase as a independent, one store or two store, we're able to aggregate national purchasing on behalf of all our members. We have about 150 members over about 220 stores. And so we're able to collectively kind of aggregate all of that purchasing so that the stores can compete better against some of the national chains.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I just want to give everyone a little bit of background. I know there's a few people in the room who might be new to the concept of NCG, so I appreciate the overview. And with that, can we start with just asking you both, we got a bunch more people filing in, can you just share your role at National Cooperative Grocers and a little bit of your background, how you came to this work? And maybe we can start with Gabby.
That's interesting. I'm Gabby. I use she, her pronouns. I work as the Racial Equity and Food Justice Manager. That's a really long title, right? Really long title. I'm there for numerous of things, but overall, it feels like I'm functioning as the equity and inclusion person at NCG. Currently, my work is interesting. Right now, I'm in Belfast, Maine. They have just got a WIC contract, and I think it's the first co-op in Maine to do that. So supporting them, support the community. And so that's where I'm hyper-focused at, like showing what true accessibility is, so they can access, so folks can access food wherever they are and however they can. My background is not in grocery. I've had a full year of food industry at NCG only. My background is in healthcare. I'm a licensed respiratory therapist, so I've worked in a hospital for since the year 2000, but the last 14 years as a respiratory therapist. And I own a private practice for mental health therapy, which is now part-time, and I work for NCG full-time.
Okay. And can I ask, on add on to that, you really work on making the food accessible in the community and supporting co-ops and doing that. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but a little bit about what that exactly means to you to make the food accessible. What type of things are you leaning into and helping folks with?
It means a multitude of things. One of the things that's been coming up, two of the things that's been coming up in my work recently is this idea of everyone welcome. And that's, of course, it's painted everywhere, it's in stone and all those things. And sometimes those two words can be a farce, right? Those can be buzzwords, just like the DEI concept. And it really should be a transition to, this space was created, with you in mind. It's no secret that the co-ops that are a part of NCG are predominantly white or serving white affluent communities, and there should be a shift in that. And so we can't keep writing everyone is welcome at co-ops and that not be true. Just because you say it doesn't mean it's that. The other thing is neurodiversity, right? And supporting neurodiverse customers and employees. So again, if we were going to say everyone is welcome and this space is not welcoming to those folks, how do we change that? Like, how are we proving these things that we've painted on the walls and put in stone in some of our buildings and added to our end statements? Just working towards that, like that encompasses true accessibility as well.
That's really exciting to hear, and I want to ask you more, but I'm going to ask Anthony now to introduce. Anthony, could you tell us your role at NCG and then a little bit about your background coming into this work?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here with you. Anthony Goodwin, Business Innovation Director for NCG. I am based in Toledo, Ohio. My background is in grocery and food justice and food access, newer to the co-op world. Started my grocery career probably like many of you as I get through college, right out of high school job. Started with Meijer, which is a large supercenter chain here in the Midwest. Started as a meat cutter, was there for 10 years, just kind of worked my way up the management chain. And when I left was also on the new store development team. So anytime a new Meijer store opened, was part of the team that went and helped to facilitate that. Was able to leverage that experience and pivot a little bit and work for a local healthcare system here in Toledo that was interested in opening a grocery store in downtown Toledo, where there hadn't been a store for over 20 years. And so the ProMedica health system really was one of the early pioneers of addressing social determinants of health and recognizing that health really is built on kind of the day-to-day living conditions and not so much the healthcare that you provide at the doctor's office. And so they were interested in opening a nonprofit grocery store and community center that had other components with workforce development, financial education, nutritional education. So I had the opportunity to spend 6 years working kind of in the intersection of healthcare and nonprofit and food justice. And then was just on LinkedIn one day and happened to come across the opportunity at NCG, and it sounded like the opportunity to take what I was doing at the local level and do it at a national level and be innovative and disruptive. And so here we are. I sit in the development cooperative, which is a subsidiary of NCG, where our store development services used to sit. And now the DC kind of functions as the R&D arm of NCG. And so my focus right now is really on developing a cooperative solution to address food access issues in LILA communities. And LILA stands for low income, low access. It's kind of one of the newer terms that are used instead of food desert, or some use food apartheid, but essentially, solving for access in communities that have none or limited access. And so it's a little bit of a new member approach for NCG, just because historically many of our members and the members that founded NCG were natural organic co-ops located in affluent, college town, white communities. And so a lot of the resources and benefits that have been built over the last 20 years have really been to serve our members, like, many co-ops do. And so, but over the last, few years, as we're starting to see this new wave of food co-ops that are really leveraging the cooperative model to address food access, the needs are different, the store model is different. And so I get the fun and exciting opportunity to figure out, how does NCG show up in that space and what kind of resources are needed for us to be able to support more diverse members outside of just kind of the typical natural organic co-op.
Very exciting. And Anthony, you mentioned this new wave, so that kind of leads me and prompts me to ask, we're talking to startups today. I know you're working with some startup projects. Can you talk a little bit about what projects you're working on or how you're focusing that work?
Yeah, so there's probably 3 primary startups that we're working with right now. One is Share Harvest, who recently opened in Winston-Salem. They are a Black-led co-op founded by 2 pastors. and really, mission to improve food access and improve health overall in the Winston-Salem community. They opened in October of 2022, so they've been open about 4 months now. And they reached out, towards almost a couple months before they were ready to open. And they had done a lot of research and, learning lessons, and Renaissance Food Co-op, which many of you are probably familiar with, is about 20 minutes from them. And so they listened to some of the other co-ops that have tried and been unsuccessful around, cost of goods and retail strategy. And so they reached out and were interested in NCG membership. And so we were able to get them approved and into the membership prior to opening. And so they've been open for about 4 months now, and just kind of going through the motions of, you have all this momentum and excitement and vision for opening, and then you open. And then you kind of have to react to, who's shopping there, what's selling. And so we're just kind of working through the new, some of the pivots and strategies, now that you're open, kind of what it takes to not only get open, but then stay open. The second is Kensington Community Food Co-op in Philly. And so they opened in 2019. And were quickly kind of affected by the pandemic and everything that brought from a retail standpoint. Kensington is also hard hit by the opioid epidemic, and so their location, while it is has limited food access, also has some other challenges that are going on that make it tough to do business in those communities. And so they closed, for those that have been following their story, they closed for a couple months and actually just reopened Tuesday of this week, which is exciting. But provides us an opportunity to help improve their pricing, improve their product mix, improve retail strategy, and hopefully turn things around and move things in the right direction for them. And the third one is Gem City, which is in Dayton, Ohio. I'm sure many of you know. And they opened in, I think, 2021. And again, based on, I think they're a primarily conventional co-op. The sales and size volume decided not to pursue NCG membership when they opened. And now, having been open for 2 years, and kind of understanding the challenges around cost of goods and pricing, are interested in NCG membership. And so another opportunity again to help with pricing, retail strategy. And so, what all of these have in common is that they may have had a lot of help to get opened, and I'm sure leverage the skills from FCI and Illuminate and other organizations that help startups, but then kind of were out operationally on their own. And so it's very challenging to run an independent grocery store, whether it's a co-op or not a co-op. And so I think these 3 stores provide the opportunity for us to say, okay, this is what happened kind of when they were on their own and weren't able to take advantage of that national network that I talked about. And with that, then what happens? And so I think it provides some learning for us to say, okay, what should have been in place, as we listen to them, and then, what are some resources that can help to keep them open and be leveraged for future startups that are coming in the pipeline.
Excellent, thank you. Gabby, I wanted to ask you, I know you're working with a lot of established co-ops, and that's probably most of your work is more focused. And, you talked about everyone welcome and how it is plastered on all the walls at all the co-ops. What can startups learn from what you're learning, being out there observing? Like, what are you observing? And if you were advising someone who's going to open a co-op, like how could they, what should they be focusing or noticing that they can learn from established co-ops are trying to correct or have gotten right?
Mm-hmm. Community. Period. And what I've noticed when I get to go to co-ops, it's always a really cool experience, but I spend a lot of time in the community just talking to people, not necessarily just people that work there or people in leadership, but people walking around the store, people shopping there, people not shopping there. I get to go in other grocery stores. And one of the things I've learned when I ask people, like, for instance, why they don't shop in the co-op, and I've heard it over and over again, it's like, like, we learned all about the co-op and I am a member. However, they disappeared once the store was open. They're around and aware when they're raising money, and then there's a disappearing of those folks in the community. Now there have been a lot of co-ops not connected to NCG that's done a really good job of staying in community and have done a lot of things. Gym City is one of those. And also I think that's the biggest thing. I also think the answer for everything is in community, but they have to be included, right? And so when we need employees, where do they come from? When we need board members, where do they come from? And so I think the reminder needs to be that the co-op needs the community just as much as the community needs the co-op. There's no competition to hunger and to eating food. The goal is for people to have access to the foods they want to eat and that are nutritious for their body. The other thing is, and this has come up a lot lately, there seems to be this idea of what healthy means, what healthy foods mean. And that's also a farce and very subjective, because that means something different for everybody. You're not going to tell somebody with a gluten allergy you should only eat wheat bread, or somebody on a neutropenic diet that, fruits and vegetables should be the main thing in their diet, because those things can be harmful with different kidney diseases. You have all that. So this idea where you can open your mind instead of telling people, like, hey, come eat here because we have healthy food, but hey, come eat here because we have food that may be healthy for you, or that may be, nutritious for you. So this idea of healthy is subjective. And once we get through that, it removes a lot of shame from people that want to shop in a co-op and from people that don't think a co-op is for them.
I wish we had more time to dive into that one. Maybe we can circle back to that. It's something I talk to a lot with startups too. It's like, be very careful about sounding like the food police, sounding like healthy has a definition and it's yours. And I think we run into that a lot at co-ops. Everyone is welcome. I mean, startups are organizing in their communities, they're talking to people, and yet they tend to be talking to the same people kind of repeatedly. This is a problem that startups have. Can you say anything more? Like, you're like, I'm out there talking to people in the community. What barriers are you seeing? Where are you seeing co-ops? Are co-ops really reaching full communities? How can we do that better?
I don't know. I'm also really good at saying I don't know. Like, I'm not going to make up an answer. But no, I mean, it's no way for you to access all of the community. You can just try hard to do so, right? Also, are you in the same spaces? Is that the reason why you're talking to the same, community members? What does that look like? The assumption that all our values are the same, they are not. So how can we align our values? And when I worked in as a respiratory therapist, one of my specialties was nicotine addiction. And so I would go around and I would help people quit using nicotine if they wanted to. So the hospital's goal for me is to go talk to them and get them to quit so they don't come back to the hospital. The person trying to quit, they don't care about that. But realistically, they may have another goal. Like, I want to go to my kid's baseball game and be able to breathe, right? And so we both have two different goals, but it was aligned in the same way. So how can we meet people and figure out, okay, what do we have that is in common that we can join up? It can't just be us telling them. We have to include the people that we say we want to serve. And I think we can all do better with that.
I love that. All
and
right.
Gabby's being a little modest. Her superpower is she can walk in a room with strangers and leave everyone's best friend. And so her ability to do that, I think, will be very beneficial for cooperators and members. And I think, to her point, stores may not do a lot of that. That you're paying enough stuff on your events board in your store, you're sending things out to your email list or social media, excuse me. But for the most part, those are people that are already following you. But how do you reach those that aren't, or new people as they move into the community? And so I think Gabby's perspective on that will be really beneficial.
I will say too, like, I don't have, I'm a member of Detroit People's Food Co-op, and I'm really excited about them opening. I'm a Detroiter through and through, but before, I've never shopped at a co-op. I've been in a co-op one, besides my time with NCG. I've had access to a co-op, but the co-op didn't provide what I needed, and it wasn't only food, right? And so that's the thing, like, when you're advertising things, nobody's going to keep coming in to learn about this kale wrap that you're teaching in your cooking class. Like, people want to know, other things. And again, they have to come to the store to know that's happening. Where are you in the community? It doesn't just have to be at the farmer's market. It doesn't have to be in food spaces. In Detroit, there's a market called the Eastern Market. I go every week, almost every weekend when it's open, to get fruits and vegetables, and whatever else I can find that I have money for. And one time I went there, this was this past summer, there was a growing circle, a growing line around one of the vendor tables. I had no idea what it was, but I like to get in lines that are long or associated with food. I'm automatically like, yes, that's what I'm about to eat. And so I'm trying to peek over, and I'm looking like, dang, what's there? There's a dude selling books. And surrounded by food, though. Everybody else is selling food, soap, things like that. And there's a guy selling books and a space for food, right? And so he didn't sell a lot of books that day, but a lot of people got a chance to learn. He also pointed to somebody else in a different stall that also had books. They were unrelated. I went over there too. They didn't know each other. It was like, hey, I heard there's another dude over there sending other people. And so as co-ops, regardless if we're connected to NCG or not connected to NCG, or what items we have, what happened if we promoted each other? That's true accessibility, because hunger is all the same. Like, they want food, right? They want food that's nutritious for them. And so the co-ops have an opportunity to provide education, not so people can only shop at the co-op, but at least they they've learned some more, so they can make the decision that's best for them. Right, and whatever healthy looks like for them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So the title of this session is Cooperative Solutions to Food Access and Racial Equity. And I'd like to ask you both how you see your work with NCG addressing that. And maybe we can start with Anthony this time.
Yeah, so I'll try not to geek out too hard here. I'm also working on my PhD, and my focus area is food justice and food access. So get a little nerdy here. But the focus of my studies, and I think a huge reason why you see inequitable access to food, really, to me, can be rooted back to redlining. And so not only did redlining affect, the ability for an individual to get a mortgage and the disparities in home ownership rates that we see today, but other businesses also kind of follow that lead. And so whether we think about healthcare or banking, and especially, today's conversation, food access, a lot of the communities that were redlined also don't have access to food today. And so, I think what has been recognized is that the chains, the big box stores, aren't coming to save us. They're not coming to save these communities. And so I think cooperatives provide an opportunity for our communities to solve for their own needs in a non-extractive way. And so I actually just read an article this morning that was talking about Whole Foods. They opened a location in Southside Chicago in 2017 and closed it in 2022, really without much notice or without much explanation of why they closed it. But at the same time that they closed that store, we're opening another store in a more affluent white community. And so I think at one point it was almost like a sign of success, or problems had been solved when a community got a big box store, when they got a Whole Foods or Kroger moved in. But as we see more and more, though, that can be taken away. If the profits aren't there, or there's other conditions that are not ideal from a corporate standpoint, that can be taken away, and the community doesn't have much say so. And so here, Whole Foods, as an example, not to pick on them, there's many other grocers that have done it, but moved into a community, extracted wealth for 5 years. And I'm not saying they didn't do any good, but they can make a decision, and there's no community input, and then here that community is again. And I think cooperatives provide a opportunity, not that it also doesn't have to be a sustainable business, but there's more say so. And you can rally members, you can go out and fundraise, you can scale back, maybe you have to close the deli in order to keep the store open. that kind of flexibility and autonomy doesn't exist in the corporate space. And so I think co-ops are, one of the best opportunities right now to solve for food justice and racial equity. And so I get, so excited about it because, unfortunately, we just can't sit back and wait for the big box stores to move in. And like I said, even if they do, it doesn't mean that they'll stay.
Yeah, very much so. Karen, I see your comment in the chat about Chicago giving huge tax breaks to everyone but Black folks. I'm from Chicagoland, not Chicago, but I did read those articles this morning, and I just want the collectively all the different forms of tax breaks and incentives they got. $19 million was given to that Whole Foods store.
Yep.
19 million. Yet we have to fight in communities to get $1 million, 2 million for a food co-op for people in the community to solve it themselves. So
yeah, that's an interesting point, JQ. This is Karen from Chicago. Next week, there's this food and justice summit that's going on at UIC, asking our new government mayoral candidates where they stand on food justice, and would they put some money behind co-ops. Actually, that was my suggestion, that they include that, because as Anthony said, that's our best option, in underserved areas, is trying to do it for ourselves instead of giving these huge tax breaks to these companies only for them to leave after it's just exhausting.
yeah,
so exhausting.
And it's exciting to see changes coming. I'm sure you all have seen some of this throughout your communities, but Bobby Rush, who's well known throughout the country, but is a U.S. representative for Illinois. He actually just put out a think piece, an article saying we need to fund food cooperatives as the solution. So it's people are waking up. It's interesting times. Really excited to hear you bring all of that up, Anthony, and why that's important about your work. Gabby, if I can ask you, title is, food justice and racial equity. How is your work helping NCG address that? And where do you see it going?
What I'm hoping is that it's addressing the fact that Black and brown people also eat, because sometimes there seems to be some forgetfulness, around that. There's a push ever since George Floyd summer, right? Where we need to do this better, we need to do that better. And I want co-ops to be able to say that and mean it and not be performative, right? There's this baseline of performative allyship or people, both in co-ops and adjacent to co-ops, where, they want to be better allies to Black and brown communities, but the focus on having that title of allies, like, that's not a thing you can be. You can only practice allyship. And that's what we need, not just in food, but all over. We need more folks in co-ops, both NCG and throughout, to practice allyship, so everybody can have the same or similar access, not only to food, but the food they want to eat, not food that's chosen for them, or that they were told, like, this is what you need to be healthy, without knowing something else. So that's what I'm hoping for my role. But my role is based in community. Like, NCG is a vessel for a community in my eye, and that's what I'm going for. And I've been supported in doing that so far.
Excellent.
The other thing I would add from a justice standpoint is that I think we've got to change the narrative on the viability of food co-ops that aren't in affluent communities. I think because there's been attempts that have not been successful, I won't call them failures, because I think you learn something every time, has been that they can't work, and every time another one isn't successful, it kind of deepens that narrative. And so what I've always said is I don't think it's fair to compare, because it hasn't been apples to apples. If you look at NCG's membership and natural organic food co-ops, they have this huge advantage. If you just look at just the cost of goods standpoint, in addition to having access to 200 other stores they can call, or our retail support team that works on site with stores, those kinds of advantages haven't been there. And so I would guess there's probably not an NCG member, in our network that when I say, we're a huge contribution to our success is the ability of having NCG membership and that network. And so I think it's just unfair to point to some of the examples of groups that have tried to make this work in low income communities or conventional co-ops that haven't been able to be successful without having the opportunity to have the same benefits and perks. And so I'm excited to see with that, not to say that NCG membership is like the golden ticket to success, but it certainly will help and creates, I think, a more level playing field to not only get stores open, but to be able to keep them open.
I think there's another piece to that too. I think even in the realm of NCG, when stores have opened and closed, I think there are, and this is outside of NCG too. So I think there have been a lot of times when that has been tried, where community was left out. Like someone has decided, like, oh, this community needs a co-op, we'll put one there, and didn't include the community that they've made the choice for them, that they know what's best, and we're going to open a co-op. And then for some reason they can't figure out why it's closed, right? So you can't go into, a historically Black neighborhood or Black neighborhood and put a co-op and put the same stuff that you have at your co-op, which isn't at a historically Black neighborhood. You can't not include the community and then expect the same community, to support you. You can't not hire the people. I mean, at least half of the people in the community. I'm a person, if Anthony right now decided to make a shampoo, I don't use it. Maybe our hair textures are different, but he told me, I got a shampoo and it's in the store, I'm going to buy 2 bottles, right? One thing I know about Black and brown people, we are going to support places and people that support us. So if you put in a co-op or any store in the community, you never included that community, why should there be a reason where you assume that it's going to be successful when you didn't include the people that you need to make you successful, right? You have to include them usually before you make the decision to open, if you can. So I'm sorry, I got on the soapbox.
No, we like that soapbox. I'm going to let you go. Tina did share in the comments that Malik Yakini was in a session last year with us in this series, and he called, you can't give people a co-op. And that is, he was trying to address something very similar. Not only that you can't go in and tell people what they need, but you also can't build it for them. You need to empower them to actually to do it themselves. So,
and there's capacity. The problem is that nobody's asked, and it's simply because the system is set up and it's working the way it was set up, right? And now you have, startups that's going against the system. And one of the things you mentioned, or somebody mentioned on here today, is, we have a lot of people that or maybe it was you, Anthony, founded these co-ops back in the day, and we like to keep members happy. But the members, literally won't be alive that long. We need to think into the future. It's a future cast. What is the co-op going to look like? Everyone's scared of losing members. And you should be, scared of losing members, but we also need to, how do we have new members too, right? There's another, I'll shut up after this. There's another organization I'm a part of, as a part of the respiratory fields. It's the American Association of Respiratory Care. And during COVID, the organization put out a statement for nurses, so nurses could learn the basics of how to use the ventilator. So in the world of healthcare, you don't touch our ventilators for respiratory. You don't touch our ventilators. Mind your business, we'll mind ours. And we were offended. It was 40,000 members. And a lot of people was offended that they did that, and 10,000 members took their membership back. We lost 10,000 members. Within that, though, we gained 25,000 members because a lot of the respiratory therapists saw that we were trying to save more people by having access, because respiratory therapists were dying at a faster pace due to the pandemic, because we were so up close, because it was a respiratory disease. So we gained members. Students became members that never thought about being members. So in this case, we lost 10,000 members, but we gained 25,000 more. So members are important, yes, but so are the shoppers. Who will be the shoppers that may become, future members?
Excellent point. Well, and that leads me to asking you guys, I mean, no, you've been with NCG a year, maybe a little over a year, so you're just starting to move into this work. What comes next? What do you see on the horizon in your work in the next year or two? And Anthony, do you want to start?
Yeah, good question. I would say right now, hyper focused on the success of the three startups that I mentioned, Harvest Market, Gem City, and Kensington, and just listening and learning about how we can be of value to them and to develop new resources to support startups. I think ultimately a little bit more downstream is you probably heard people talk about, like, you got to be from the second meeting in the living room, that's where the vision and the strategy is set. And so what I'm also working towards, we have this kind of live and breathing set of startups that are out, doing the work. But then also, how do we develop a strategy so that NCG can be there, from that second meeting to be able to provide guidance and advice. And ultimately, help to set up these stores for success again, to get open, but then stay open. A big piece of that, which I don't think I've really mentioned in detail, is a conventional contracts. And so NCG has a national contract with UNFI is the natural organic, but with UNFI acquiring Super Value a few years ago, that was kind of a tipping point, I think, for the ability to secure hopefully a similar contract on the conventional side. And so again, it's very hard to compete as an independent store. And so for many of the stores that are addressing food access, either being primarily conventional or like kind of like a Gem City or more of a hybrid 50-50 mix, requires that stores can compete both on natural, organic, and conventional. And so our purchasing team is working on trying to secure a conventional contract so that we can offer that same value. And I would say lastly, just kind of changing the narrative, like I mentioned, and also just making the startup community, I think, aware of this body of work and mission of NCG. I think at times, fairly enough, if you weren't going to be a natural organic co-op or located, in a high sales, high income neighborhood, NCG, there was thoughts that NCG wasn't for them, or, they were kind of told, that you really shouldn't apply. There's not enough value there. So I hope that the more that people understand and see that this body of work is underway, and things like the conventional contract, and we've recently changed our membership criteria to not have a minimum sales requirement before you apply. So all of these things are kind of opening the door for NCG, for more co-ops if they're interested to pursue NCG membership. And so I just want to make sure that word gets out there, because I know historically that hasn't always been the case.
I was going to ask you about the conventional contract issue,
Yep.
but glad you brought it up. And we've got some questions pouring in, but I want to give Gabby a chance first to talk a little about where you see your work going in the next year or two.
Yeah. Well, should be working with Anthony a little bit more with the new startups. I'm excited to hear more about how that will be going, but also to support co-ops moving into being connected via community. There are a lot of co-ops, both within our network and outside of our network, that are doing cool things in silos, and a lot of them are open to sharing. So instead of recreating the wheel, they can depend on each other, for certain things, especially that will deeply impact the community or the success for people looking to eat differently and maybe looking to shop at co-ops, but not only the success of the co-op. Short and sweet. Okay.
Excellent. Well, we've got some questions for you. Well, one is just Dorchester Food Co-op, which will be opening this year, as one of our startups in Boston, Massachusetts, just says, I hope you will support Dorchester for NCG membership, but we're also be interested to learn from other co-ops, who are having success in communities with similar challenges. Lila compounded by opioid challenges, which is some of what their community is facing as well. So that's no pressure or anything.
Yeah. Noted.
Bonnie, though, from SOLA, so that South LA Food Co-op, is asking, does NCG provide guidance? Is this consulting for a fee basis, or is there an actual program of support for startups?
So historically, our store development team has worked with startups that weren't members, and it is fee-based. And so that body of work is typically around like pro formas, store design, helping with lease reviews, equipment sourcing, those kinds of things. Beyond that, I think we're still trying to figure out like what does it look like for us to be there from the second meeting. We have resource managers right now that are assigned to our core. We have an Eastern, Central, and Western corridor. And so we have a team of retail support managers that they each have, certain co-ops that they're kind of accountable for. We don't have someone that is a dedicated resource to startups today, but certainly something that we're exploring.
So Stuart, who has just left as our founding ED, but he is here with us. He's still working with startups in other ways. He said he heard that for those who don't know, Lila from the Durham Food Co-op as a startup that opened, I think, good 7 years ago now, known particularly for doing good things around pricing access and community building and making people feel like it's truly their store. That Lila has joined the NCG team. Will she be working on some of these projects as well?
Not directly, but I think her work correlates in the sense that she's going to be working on what NCG is calling like next level, which is some common systems and processes for co-ops to adopt. So like common financial systems, common chart of accounts, common produce PLUs, just like some back office stuff that the customer knows nothing about, but will help the co-ops to run more efficiently. And so as those systems are developed, those will also be things that as startups are in the process of store planning, it will be things that they don't have to worry about, and they can kind of have these off the shelf different back office systems. And so correlated in that startups will benefit, but not directly related, if that makes sense.
We had a question from Ty a while back, and I want to circle back to it. He's with the Human Agricultural Cooperative. He says, how are you all working, and I think it means NCG, with farmers within these co-ops? And he works with a network of over 400 farmers wanting a bigger part of nationwide help in building with co-ops and food co-ops. Is there cross building to other cooperative areas, other cooperative organizations to work together within NCG?
Yeah, I would love to connect. I'm actually working with Black Farmers Cooperative in Mileston, Mississippi, which is in Holmes County, which is the poorest county in the country. And so we're working on not only capacity building within the cooperative, but also how do we create market opportunities. I think they have like over 5,000 acres or something like that. How can we create market opportunities to get product into our stores? Our purchasing team also has an entire supplier diversity project that they're working on. But I would love to connect and talk specifically about some of the farmers and the cooperative work that I'm doing.
And I don't know if NCG has been involved in any of that, but I know in the past there have been some partnerships with the National Federation of Southern Federation of Cooperatives. Yep. Mm-hmm. As well. And so you saw products being grown by farmers in southern regions and cooperatives being sold at Seward Food Co-op in Minneapolis. So I know there's some of those partnerships have existed in the past.
Yeah, there was last summer they did a watermelon promotion with FSC. So hoping to repeat that this year and then do a sweet potato deal with Mileston Cooperative, but there's certainly lots of opportunities to bring in more farmers.
And Ty's put his information in the chat. I'll get it to you. But so those who don't know, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives is a farmer cooperative, supports farmers, and has existed for a very long time, and predominantly historically Black. So small farmers, medium-sized farmers who are working within this cooperative. And so some of those products are already being sold within NCG. And it sounds like looking for more and more ways to make those larger things spread throughout. That's awesome. And Michelle Schrei decided to pipe in because you know how this goes when your coworkers are in the chat here. She said NCG Retail Support is working on crafting a startup package for development of back office systems prior to launch. So this may not sound super exciting to those of you who aren't very far along, but one of the biggest challenges we've seen over and over with opening startups is that we don't have systems to plug and play. And so you're building them from scratch based on the knowledge of the GM you get, who might have built systems before or might have worked for a system that already had them. And it's the place that things really tend to fall apart. So this is something that is really needed for startups that NCG is also working on. Were there other comments and questions are welcome in the chat. If people want to throw those in there. So I want to throw it back over to Gabby. and you talk, I just want to push on this welcome thing a little more. And you talk about, go out, talk to people, but do you want to share anything? Are you open to sharing about what, because I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours. What doesn't feel welcoming to a lot of folks when they walk into the co-op? Like, does the is it the space themselves, the food that's on the
It's
shelf?
white. It's white. First. It's white. So it's hard. For instance, I'm in Belfast, Maine right now. I've been here since Monday, and so far I've seen one other Black person, and we both looked at each other like, blink twice if you need help, like, what, because we here together. Anyway, when I go into spaces like that, not just the state, but even into the co-op, I always have not necessarily some anxiety, but I'm absolutely hyper aware, and that doesn't go down until I see how people will treat me, and so a lot of times there's this idea like we should go into things with, positive intent, and I believe that to a certain extent, but historically that has not been the case. So I'm saying it's white. I mean, that's just the first thing that came to my mind, but you can't say everyone is welcome here, but I have to pull the door open and it's too heavy. You can't say everyone is welcome here when I have a sensory issue and I'm overloaded by smells, and there's nothing that can assist me with that. My mother is blind. She loves going to the grocery store though. So when we go, we get a cart, we put her on the front of the cart, she puts her hands on it, she throws her stick in the cart, and we guide the cart from the back, right? If we can't turn that corner because there's so many things on the end cap, you can't say everyone is welcome here. And a lot of those things are physical, accessibility limits, but there are other things that are accessible. How do folks look at you when you come in? I don't know how to use bulk systems in every store. It's hard to ask for help, And so what can we do to make that easier, to create not a safe space, because safe spaces don't exist, but a safer space where people can come in, shop, not feel judged by what we are putting in our carts, and so we can ask for help if we need it. So I think everybody says everyone is welcome, and I think maybe in the reason why it's so popular amongst co-ops is because when co-ops this is with my 1 year of expertise, so correct me if I'm wrong, because when a lot of co-ops were started, they were member only, right? And so I think everyone is welcome, like, hey, you can shop here too. We also want your money. And now it's morphed into something else. It's become a buzz phrase like DEI. Like we've used it and used it and used it. And so you don't necessarily have to, cover the paint, but you do have to prove it. You do have to make it sure. If we're just going to talk about race, there are a lot of spaces that are predominantly white. We're absolutely not welcoming. Why should the co-op be special? We need to prove that we are special, not just for Black and brown people, but other people with minoritized identities.
And I would say personally that your understanding of where everybody welcome came from is accurate and how it's morphed. It was mostly that people were confused that they were allowed to shop there at all without having a membership, and then it conveniently morphed. And I think people mean it, but yes, you aren't wrong. We have a couple more comments, and I want to see one of them is a little bit of a question. So we'll stick with the ones more question oriented. I'm wondering if NCG would have any guidance for startups on how to think about site location and balancing, not trying to give a Lila community a food co-op, but also recognizing that this is where a food co-op could have the greatest impact.
It's a good question. Yeah, I've thought about this a little bit. I mean, you think about what it takes to start a food co-op, and I think the average is like, what, 7 to 10 years? I mean, that's a lot of time.
The average is 5 to 7, but yes.
5 to 7, okay.
There are
feels,
some 10 and
it
over.
feels like 10. Just like the work and effort and sometimes duplication that may go into that. And so I've thought about, like, is there a model where there's a lot of, for existing co-ops, that a lot of talk about, like, should we merge statewide? And then if there's a co-op that wants to open in our state, then, you know, we kind of bring this infrastructure and they don't have to start a new co-op and develop a board and write bylaws. And so is there a way that you could have, you know, a cooperative solution that, you know, serves the needs and is developed to serve a Lila community? And of course, you still, you know, engage community. To Gabby's point, you hire from the community, but almost in the same way that a chain store would decide to move into a community, that you could have a food co-op solution that the community, I think, could proactively kind of welcome in. And since it's a co-op, you know, there's more buy-in and there's more say-so than a chain. So that's one thing I've been thinking about. I'd be interested in Gabby's thoughts, though, given her focus on community.
Yeah. I think asking the community, like, they all know. And so, like, I'm reading back to this question that Brad put, like, I pulled it up, like, let me make sure I'm dissecting it right. Recognizing how we are being gatekeepers. Oh, that's the wrong comment. Sorry.
That's a good one, but it's the wrong one.
Brian, it was Brian, not Brad. Thanks for putting that comment in there, Brad. And so, like, we determine what a Lila community is and then engage in the community, like, where is the space? There's a store opening in Philly, that Weaver's Way in Germantown. One of the things I noticed about the outside space is that it's on a flat land. When I say it's flat, because everything else is uphill, right? And so that, I mean, that's one thing for accessibility, but I've also watched elders go up in walkers and turn around because they were too tired. Like, I've stood on the sidewalk and watched them. And I asked them, like, hey, why did you change your mind? Like, it's just too far. And they I guess, went back home. I don't know where they went. I don't follow them, because, you know, that would be creepy. But thinking about that, like, how do you truly, like, go into the community, ask the questions? There are all types of meetups. Google super free. It's been free for a minute. Like, how can we use those and let the community decide, right? It sounds like in this question, Brian stated, like, once you determine you want to give, not giving them a co-op, but you recognize there is a need and it could have a greatest impact. Who said that? Like, determining who said it would have the biggest impact, because it doesn't exist, or because the community is asking for it and nobody has given it yet, or nobody has provided resources so they can make it themselves. So yeah, I think location is a big deal, but I ultimately think, like, go to the community and ask them so they can feel included. Even if you don't take the advice, you know, asking and finding these things out, make people feel included and be actually inclusive, right? And not performative.
And there are people who've carved this path before, and this is what Gem City did. You know, it's organizing with people, not about people. So Gem City did this, and before that, Seward did this with their friendship store. So there are models where people have gone to the community that they were. In Gem City's case, they were of the community they were serving. In the Seward community, Seward was going to a community that didn't before feel served by Seward, and went through a real process with the community to build that store. So, and we have time for maybe one more question. And I know, Brian, you have your hand up. The speakers have agreed to stay after the recording ends if people want to continue the conversation a little bit. So I don't want anyone to feel like we're going to cut it right out. Bonnie said, in our community, people definitely want food, but have never had a co-op before. So there's a lot of trust building that has to happen. Anything you want to share along that line, Gabby?
No, it's up to us. Like, they have to see the value in it. Just because I didn't see the value in co-ops. I didn't see the value in co-ops until I learned more about Detroit peoples. And I worked at NCG when this happened. When I moved back to Detroit, I learned about Detroit People's Co-op and just hearing the stories. And like, yes, it took, these years, but like, man, I'm like, I want to be a part of, take my money immediately. But people have to find value in things. And it still took me like to realize what a co-op was. But I wanted that story. I think it's up to the co-op to provide that story so people can find value by themselves. Right? I didn't know about a GMO until I worked at NCG. And somebody kept saying like, we have food without GMOs. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm 40 and I just learned what a GMO was the last 12 months, right? So people have the information they have. Everybody doesn't know what to Google, although it exists, right? So I think co-ops will having followings and having membership, we should be providing that for free to people who are members, but also people who are shoppers and potential members, right? We have that, we owe that to the community that we go and open a store in.
Excellent. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up there. Like I said, but we are very lucky. Both speakers have generously said that they will stay a little bit after the end of the recording. So if you want to continue this conversation, please do stick around. You are very welcome to do that. But first, I just want to take a minute and thank Anthony and thank Gabby so much for coming and sharing their time and their expertise with us and answering our questions. So big shout out to them. Thank you both so much. Just so you know, we have a couple more great conversations happening. Today is the last day of the series. We'll be back with the series in May, but until then, we've got left gentrification and food co-ops facilitated by Darnell Adams, but with a terrific panel, Jamila Medley, Amaha Slassi, Ray Williams, who runs Steward Food Co-op, Malik Yakini from Detroit People's Food Co-op, Maha's from Gem City. Some great conversation is going to happen, an important conversation. This will be an 1.5 hour long session to provide room for the whole spaciousness of the conversation. I would not miss it. And the National Conference on the Black Co-op Agenda. We'll be hosting a session with Ron Hance, the Executive Director of Network for Developing Conscious Communities. He'll be talking about the movement of Black cooperation, including food co-ops and beyond food co-ops. I would be remiss if I didn't say we would not be here today and this series would not be possible without the USDA, National Cooperative Bank, National Cooperative Grocers, and CoBank. Thanks so much to them for making this possible.